So here's something I learned recently that's a lot of fun: server-side template injection. So if you look at a website these days, my websites are just plain HTML where everybody sees exactly the same page and I code the HTML directly, but that's the really old technique. In the modern technique, you have site pages like Amazon, and they are actually dynamically created. So they use an engine which builds the website from a template and fills in components that vary. And so there's a whole structure there. And so let me bring up my example, which is someplace on this page. I have a demonstration and have a live page up. There it is. Okay, here's my live page. Good. So here's a page. Now, this is a fake search engine. There is no real database. So if you search for anybody like Fred, it'll say it found Fred. So all it does is it finds people and then it prints out their name. So that's not very exciting, but it's doing it with server-side template engines. And so that means if you put in active code here, like bracket, bracket, 1 + 1, curly brace, it will dynamically evaluate that code. That is the way you put in metacode, which should be evaluated by the engine. So now I have code injection. Since they didn't filter the input, I was able to add template commands, which should not be available to the end user. And now I can execute code on the server. The only thing is this template injection is kind of a screwy language and you have to learn it a bit. But the fact is this is incredibly dangerous because it's based on Python 3. And here's why. In Python 3, because it's object-oriented, you can get away with murder. And by the way, I think the same thing's true of Python 2. But let's play, so let me get down to the demonstration here. Okay, all right. So the first thing you do is fingerprint the server to find out which engine you have. So as I showed you, if you have 2 curly braces and put in some math, it'll evaluate the math. So that's 4. And then there's a little chart here where you can try some options. So you put in this one, and if it evaluates this and gives you 49, you follow the green arrow. But if it fails, you follow the red arrow. Then you try this one, and if it works, you follow the green. If it fails, you follow the red. So you'll find which of the popular platforms the server's using, which is Mako, Jinja 2, and Twig. Anyway, that's the first thing. Is now, here's a way to get a flag. But what I really wanted to show you was how inheritance works in Python. So I can do all this in just the interactive shell, Python 3. Okay, now, if I do this, s equals hello, dir s. This we've done before. I don't think we use dir, we use type, but directory will show you what's in a Python object. Everything is an object, even just an integer or a string. So this is just a string, but it's an object and it has a directory. Strings are, everything is this complicated object-oriented stuff in Python. It's not obvious. And we've been using Python so far, sort of like you would use a simpler language, but everything is object-oriented, so just a string has all these methods, including the underscore ones that are mainly for internal use, and all these others. So you can do lower and upper, so I can take s dot lower, and that will be a lowercase version of hello. So the string object has methods, and it has some of these methods here that are for sort of giving you the internals of how Python uses it, like s class. This tells you what class it is. So s is a string, and the underscore underscore class underscore underscore method tells you what it is. So that's fine, but realize what's happened here. If I wrote a C program and I accepted data from the user, that would just go into a string object, which is just an array of bytes. And as you know, if you have a buffer overflow, you can totally take over the machine with it. And it turns out in Python, accepting a string from the user can also lead to total compromise of the machine if you let them put in these meta characters. So that's what you're going to see here. We can walk up the hierarchy. So that was S class, right? I could do S class and do it again. What's the class of that class object? It's type. So I'm getting a different answer. What you're doing is walking up the hierarchy of objects in Python. And here's how it looks. You start from a string, you go up to the class. If you go to the class of that, it's type. But if you do class base, you get up to this one, which is object. And object is the root of the entire tree. So now you have made it up to the root of the Python object-oriented structure, and you can now do subclasses to move down here. And when you do this, so you start with a string, you go up to the root of the entire tree, then you come back down to subclasses. Now, if you do the subclasses of this object, you will find a method called catch warnings, and that method has a function called import. So a programmer writes some code, they take a string from the user, but if they don't filter out these dots and underscores, the user can write a string which will be interpreted as walking up the hierarchy, and now I can import Python modules that the developer did not put in their program. So I can do anything. It is bloody awesome. So by having a complicated object that starts looking this long, I can import the system library, and then I can run bash command line commands from inside a Python string. So that's bloody awesome. And that's the game here. You enumerate the subclasses, and you'll find it's a little bit complicated, but you eventually end up with these long injections that give you remote code execution, and this is called server-side template injection. So it's good, clean fun, and I learned about this from a tweet. Somebody put a tweet on Twitter, and they had this 3 lines of code, and they said, this is the simplest SSTI injection that gives me execution on a server. And I said, what is that? That looks interesting. It looks sort of like SQL injection, these long, baffling commands, and it's really not that hard. So anyway, you can check it out here and set it up and find a few flags using that. So I'm going to stop that.